To start this tournament, we saw Czechia beat the US, then we saw the Slovaks beat Canada for the first time in history at this tournament. Today, we saw Denmark beat Germany and Czechia beat Sweden. Is this a dream or is this a nightmare? Gold medal, let's go! Back on the fly, this here recapping, predicting the World Junior Championship, the U18 Women's World, the Men's World Championship, the Women's World Championship, the U18 Men's World Championship. What is happening? It is by far one of the dumbest things I have ever seen. Prepare to die. Figured it was better safe than sorry. Scores! Nathan McKinnon! Scores for Canada.
Your home for international hockey. This is On the Fly.
Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping Day 2 of the Men's Under-18 World Championships happening in Bratislava and Trenčín, Slovakia. So hop into today starting with the scores from today's game, starting with a 4-1 win for Denmark over Germany. Now, coming into this game, we talked a little bit about it in yesterday's recap video. We spent quite a bit of time on it in our 10-team previews, as well as our tournament preview and prediction video, where this game for both these teams was ultimately going to end up deciding which team ends up getting sent to the relegation game, most likely in Group B. And for both these sides coming into today's game, we saw the desperation factor kind of kick in a little. And especially for this German team, as they went down early, we started to see them kind of try and move to that desperate factor as this one went onwards. And for the Danes, it was a near perfect game from them, accepting the fact that Germany is probably going to control the pace of play in this game, which they were okay with coming in. They knew they were going to have to commit to a defensive structure. They did a really good job at neutralizing a lot of those kind of high quality chances for this German team. But at the same time, especially for the Danes, their goaltender had to be big. And Anton Emil Vilde Larsen, the guy who we've highlighted twice now, once on our podcast, once in the Team Denmark team preview, he needed to be big in this game, and he was certainly that and more. And you look especially for this Danish team now for the rest of this tournament, they won their one game that matters, right? They won their first game of the tournament. They won the game that, if you look kind of down the line, barring any kind of miracle, which we'll get to when we get to the news section, but barring any miracle for Germany, the Danes just locked up the above spot from the relegation. They won't be playing in the relegation game this year, which is a big advantage for them. But still, you look at this game for the Danes, a well-played game, well-executed game more than anything else. They pick up probably the biggest win of their tournament in their opening game of the tournament, taking this one today, 4-1 over Germany. Then we go to the second game of the day, and they did it. Yay! Canada finally beat Latvia, or Canada finally won a game at this tournament. 6-0, your final here. This game, as much as, yes, the final score indicative of somewhat of a blowout game, we finally did see Canada start to unlock those skating lanes, finally figure out how to pass the puck, and actually hit the net for once, which was nice to see. But especially coming off of yesterday's performance against the Slovaks, which we spent quite a bit of time on. You look at this game for Canada, they had a lot of pressure coming into this game. They had a lot of pressure coming into this tournament. I don't want to discredit that, but a lot of pressure coming into this game, especially after losing the very first one, is always a tough one to try and come back from. Credit to the Canadians today for actually coming out and playing this game and ended up winning this game. Definitely not a perfect performance, but still a performance that they can walk away happy with. As for Latvia, this game was always going to be a washout type of game. The Canadians, unlike at the World Juniors, we tend to see a little bit less structure at the U18 level, which is how the Latvians are so impressive, especially at those kind of tournaments. They are still positioned well through the rest of the tournament. We had originally predicted 9-2 the final for this game, and so this result doesn't necessarily surprise me. We'll get to the surprises in just a second. But for Canada and for Latvia in particular, this was the kind of game that they needed to kind of get their legs underneath them. It's always tough to start these kind of tournaments, and they did a good enough job. Yes, you lose by a pretty high score to a good Canadian team, but in the end, it's still the first game of the tournament. Not too much worry, at least from my side, as of this current point in the tournament. I am looking for them to definitely start to pick up the pace a little bit as they go on to the more important games through the rest of this tournament. But through day one, still definitely some things that they can take away and be happy with from this game against the Canadians. Canada does end up taking this game over Latvia by a score of 6-0. Then to the third game of the day, where we saw Czechia upset Sweden by a score of 2-1. And this was a crazy game, right? Where coming in, you knew that it was going to be a relatively tight game. You know, still expecting the Swedes to come out on top. You look at the Swedish roster this year, kind of 1-2 with Canada. We've seen now Sweden and Canada lose, so that kind of goes to show what kind of tournament this has been, as we kind of talked about off the intro. But you look at it for this Czech team. In this game, they played a near perfect game. They started red hot in that first period, controlled a lot of the pace, were able to really put some pressure on the Swedish team and garner some of that belief. And we see that especially at these IIHF tournaments, where you continue to build momentum throughout games when you can remain close with your opponents, especially in that kind of upset type of scenario where you're expecting to be close. This is the kind of performance for me that the Czechs, they were able to generate the momentum early. They get the goal in that second period fairly early in, and then from there, they continue with some really impressive hockey, and eventually, of course, they end up finding their way with the win. Swedes tie it up on the power play, make it a 1-1 game, and then with 21 seconds left, the Czechs get their last goal of the game. Kind of reminds you a little bit of those World Junior type of games against Canada, where, of course, you know, you see the last few quarterfinals games where they played against each other with that late goal, with the dagger type of goal. So for the Czechs today, a huge win. Early on in the tournament, they've picked up the first 2 wins of the tournament, 2 unlikely wins as well, beating both the US, originally coming into this tournament as our 3rd ranked team, and then Sweden, our originally ranked second ranked team. So 2 huge wins today, or 2 huge wins over the last 2 days for this Czech team. They'll now look to try and secure the top spot in Group B with some more wins. They are in prime position to do so this early on in the tournament, but still definitely a storyline to keep an eye on. For Sweden, they looked relatively flat today. A bit of a disappointing start for them, very similar to kind of what we saw with Canada in their game against the Slovaks, where they kind of started relatively slow. The difference was we saw the Swedes kind of find their groove towards the end of this game. Unfortunately, just a little bit too little too late. The Czechs get a late goal, and in the end, Czechs do walk away from this one with a 2-1 win over Sweden, picking up a huge 3 points in the Group B standings. Then we go on to the last game of the day between Slovakia and Norway. The Slovaks coming off a huge win on yesterday's game over Canada. Norway, a game that I wouldn't necessarily say they were, terribly happy with, but you look at it for the Slovak team into this game, an impressive performance here, right? And more than anything else, I'd say they were hoping to try and kind of keep it within range as long as they could before finally breaking that door open. For Norway, they were just trying to hold on for as long as they could. The Slovaks go up 2-0. You get the 2-1 goal and make it a little bit more interesting. But from there, we just saw the Slovaks really pull away in this game. And it's another result for them that they'll walk away not only happy with the final result on the scoreboard, but also with the way that they play. That's 2 really impressive wins from them early on in this tournament. Of course, you're going to have some big games coming up against the Finns as well as Latvia. Both those games are going to be extremely important. If Slovakia ends up taking that top spot over in Group A, we could have 2 surprise teams end up in the top spot in Group A and in Group B, which just throws the standings off that much more. It will be very interesting to keep an eye on that as this tournament goes along. But still, a big 3 points for Slovakia today. They beat Norway 6-1. As we will now shift over to the news section. We'll start here with the Germans with miracles. And for Germany, they're now going to need a miracle to get themselves out of the relegation spot at this tournament. Losing to Denmark today, 4-1, 2 empty net goals on top of that, was extremely disappointing for them. And I think you look for the Germans now, kind of looking ahead into this tournament, what they're going to need. You're going to have to go out and beat 2 very tough teams. You're going to have to beat the Czechs, who, if you look at the Czech team, they've started pretty hot at this year's tournament. And then you're going to have to go out and beat the US. 2 teams very unlikely that they end up beating. Yes, the US just lost to the Czechs as well. They're going to be out looking for a vengeance. And so for this German team, it's a very disappointing start to this tournament. Whether or not they're going to be able to kind of climb their way back in, you also add in the fact they lost to the Swedes, which knocks out another opportunity for them to try and climb up the point totals. With the Danes picking up all 3 points today, they will need at least two games with points, and one of them has to be a win, more or less, assuming that they can win one in regulation. Then they have to get 1 extra point. If they win both in overtime or shootout, that also works. They need 4 points essentially from this point on to avoid the relegation spot. It will be very difficult for them to do so, especially given the fact that their goal differential now, assuming Denmark ends up losing the rest of their games, will be that 3-way tiebreaker of a nightmare where you're already down 3 goals in this tournament. An unfortunate result today for this Danish team, or for this German team. We'll see whether or not they are going to be able to pull off a miracle, because at this point, that's all they really have left to avoid that relegation spot and go into that relegation game against the loser of Group A. Then we go to Denmark with, it's the one that matters, and it's the storyline we talk so much about at these tournaments. The game that matters for the Danes coming into this tournament was this game against Germany. They could win that one, they'd stay up most likely, barring any kind of crazy upsets, which doesn't seem all that likely now at this tournament. They're going to avoid the relegation spot. They're going to avoid that relegation game more than anything else. Well, then from there, they would have to play against Group A, so there's still a chance. But for Denmark, they win their most important game of the tournament today. Now it's about how much further can they go. Do I think they make it much higher up in this group? Realistically, no. We've seen, of course, from the Czechs, from the US, and from Sweden, the kind of competition they're going to see in Group B. I don't see that being much of an opportunity there. However, now there does exist the opportunity looking across the group, where if you're looking at Group A, there is now a bit more of that influx in the standings where you could see any combination of 5 teams. You know, you look at the top spot in particular, we just saw Canada lose to Slovakia. Slovakia might now just be that top spot, which if you're a team like Denmark, I think you would rather play the Slovaks at this point in the tournament, although they have been playing really well, than say a team like Canada, where it is going to be a little more difficult of a game, especially with the pace they play with. And as Canada continues to get better at these tournaments, especially considering Canada is a notorious slow starter, especially at the U18s and some of the other tournaments as well, they're only going to get better from here on out. And so for the Danes, yes, they win their one game that matters. They're going to avoid the relegation spot, most likely, barring any upsets at this tournament. And now it's just a matter of how much further they can go. Then to Canada, with they are back-ish, I guess. You look at this team, once again, a tough game against the Slovaks to open the tournament. They did not play well at all. Today's game, a little bit better. Still some room to improve, but early on in the tournament, a little bit of that early tournament jitters. Now we'll see what's next for Canada at this year's tournament. Some huge games coming up for them. We're going to see what kind of performance they can put together, but a big 6-0 win today for this Canadian team to try and get themselves back on track at this tournament. Then to Latvia with here we go. And part of the joy of this tournament for Latvia is that this first game was really always going to be a bit of a struggle for them. You look at their upcoming game as well. They're going to go play Finland tomorrow. It's going to be a tougher game. I'm not going to say that they're going to be able to kind of pull off a big win in that game. It's very unlikely they do. But at the same time, it's now for Latvia to kind of get themselves going. Their game tomorrow is going to be a tough one, but if they can kind of put together one more good performance, they set themselves up really well going forward into this tournament. And so for Latvia, I think as much as, yes, you end up losing today a relatively not so nice margin, 6-0 the final, there is still some potential for this Latvian team to continue going down the road. They can build on some of their smaller successes from this game and continue to build as they go into their games that matter at this tournament towards the end, where we'll see them play Slovakia and Norway. Their game against Norway now becomes ever so much more important as they look to try and avoid that relegation spot at this year's tournament. And so we'll see what kind of performance they can put together in the build up to that game. Then we'll go to Sweden with wow, and another game for them that I'd say just kind of got away at this tournament. And it's been that kind of storyline for really all the big three at this tournament, whether it's Canada, the US, or the Swedes, where we've seen all three of those teams kind of let games slip away at this tournament. And so for Sweden, a bit of that wow factor today, where you kind of get reminded early on that you are not invincible at these tournaments, and every game does matter. You got to come to play, and if you start the first period asleep, you're going to allow teams to generate a lot of momentum, a lot of belief, and that's exactly where we see teams start to struggle a little bit more. Sweden today with a bit of that wow impression off the start. We'll see if they can bounce back coming up through the rest of this tournament. Then to the Czechs with they are a legit threat now. And after beating both the USA and Sweden to start this tournament, Team Czechia is looking extremely good coming into this kind of playoff round, assuming they go on and win the next two games against the Danes and against Germany. If they can win both of those, they're going to look extremely well, going being as that top spot over in Group B. We'll see what the situation looks like in Group A, because once again, there's a bit of that three-way tiebreaker potential that could come back in that top spot in Group A, so they could very well enter as the top seed at this year's tournament going in, which would be a huge opportunity for them, and so we'll see whether or not that's going to end up happening. But once again, for the Czechs, after winning both their first two games against in really games that they weren't expected to really win, although they were expected to keep it close, they have shown themselves to be a legit threat at this year's tournament. And teams like Canada, teams like Sweden, teams like the US, teams like Finland, teams like Slovakia now should be on high alert, especially as they go into the playoff rounds there. Then to Slovakia they are staying hot at this tournament. And another big win for them today. We'll see if they can continue their success. Obviously, some big games still to come. A big one against the Finns. We'll see whether or not they're going to be able to pull off a win there. A big one against Latvia as well, where, once again, if they lose to Latvia, they lose to the Finns, all of a sudden that win against Canada means a whole lot less. Although, once again, a belief win is always an important one as well. We'll see what kind of performance this Slovak team can continue to do as they stay hot at this year's tournament. Then to Norway with a bit of the so what. And I know that this game coming in, they were hoping to keep it relatively close, but in the end, as soon as we saw Slovakia go out and beat Canada, this game for them became significantly less important. And so now we'll see whether or not this kind of, because of the three-way tiebreaker, it no longer becomes really valid for the bottom three teams with Latvia, Slovakia, and Norway. This game, unless they were to win it, didn't necessarily mean all that much for them. Unfortunately for them, it kind of got out of hand a little bit, but in the end, it's a so what game. Their game that matters is still coming up. They're going to play against Latvia. If they can beat Latvia, they're very likely going to stay up at the top division at this tournament and not have to go to the relegation game, where if they lose that game, then of course we will see them into that relegation game. And so still, as much as yes, you walk away with a loss today, the implications of that specific loss, not as important as you might think. And so once again, for the Norwegian team today, although they do lose, the end result as far as the standings go, not necessarily all that impactful. As we do now shift over to the standings, when we'll see in Group A, Slovakia in the top spot with 6 points, Finland with one regulation win in the second spot with 3 points, Canada in that third spot with one regulation win, one regulation loss. Mind they have lost to Slovakia, as we probably mentioned quite a few times throughout this video, but they'll lose that tiebreaker if they end up tied with the Slovaks in the standings. Latvia with one regulation loss in fourth place, and then Norway in that last spot with 2 regulation losses. Once again, a reminder that the bottom team will play in a one-game relegation playoff. Both last place teams in Group A and Group B, one relegation game playoff. Losers sent down to Division 1A. They will be replaced by Switzerland, who just earned their promotion today at the men's under 18 Division 1A World Championships. So big congrats to them. We will be having our full day recap video for that, our short form content coming out on YouTube, as well as our social media platforms on Instagram, Twitter, X, and TikTok. You can find all those accounts at onthefly1515. So be sure to go check those out if you have not already. Once again, we'll see Switzerland coming up to the top division for next year. Whoever loses that relegation game playoff will end up going down and replace them at the Division 1A level. We'll move over to Group B now, where we'll see the Czechs in the top spot with 5 points, Denmark in the second spot with 3 points, Sweden in the third spot with one regulation win, one regulation loss with 3 points. Because of, once again, the extra game, they are no longer tied for that spot. The US in that fourth spot with one overtime loss with 1 point, and then Germany in that last spot, the relegation spot as of right now, with 2 regulation losses. As we talked about, it'll be very difficult for them to climb back out. Their best chance is to go out and beat the US. They can do that, assuming the US can go on a bit of a losing streak. All of a sudden, there is the potential there, but because of the fact that Denmark did end up beating them today in regulation, a very difficult track out. You're going to need basically 2 wins at this tournament to try and find yourself out of this ditch. against arguably the two of the best teams at this tournament, the Czechs and the US. We'll see whether or not they can get that job done. But we will now shift over to tomorrow's games on April the 24th. We'll start here at 10 a.m. Eastern time between Denmark and the USA. As far as what to expect in this one, probably not going to be the best of games. You're going to expect to see the US dominate in this one. But as we've been proven so many times at this tournament, what is on paper never actually translates to what's in the game. And so as much as, yes, the US will walk into this game heavily favored, we'll see whether or not that end result is kind of what is expected of this game. I think especially considering the US is coming off of a loss, we'll see the Danes really put it heavy to the metal. But we'll see whether or not the US is going to kind of be able to kind of keep that and get that rebound type of game going. Where for Denmark, obviously coming off a big win, we'll see whether or not they're going to be able to kind of find their way through at this year's tournament. Then to Finland and Latvia at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. That's 6 o'clock Central European time, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern European time. And so for this game, I would say you're kind of looking, once again, one of those types of games that isn't necessarily going to be the prettiest. I'd expect Finland to really walk away with this one, but the way these two teams play, especially with their commitment to their defensive structure, could provide a little bit of that more interesting type of game. And so when you're comparing the two games as far as expected blowouts go, the game between Latvia and Finland is probably going to be the closer of the games just because of their commitment to defense first hockey versus the US and Denmark, where two teams who can appreciate a good high scoring game. Unfortunately, I'm going to go not with that Denmark-US game because I just think with those high-scoring games, we tend to see that score get stretched out a little bit more. With the Finns and Latvia, I do think that one can be a little bit closer, and so we'll see kind of what's to come for tomorrow. But as far as, once again, your game of the day, Finland-Latvia at 12 o'clock p.m. noon Eastern time, 6 o'clock Central European time p.m., and then 7 p.m. Eastern European time for your game of the day between Finland and Latvia. As well, Denmark taking on the U.S. at 10 a.m. We will, of course, break it all down then. But we will now, that'll do it for our scheduled content today. We'll now switch into viewer questions. We do put out a poll on our Twitter, X, and YouTube page asking for your thoughts and opinions on the day. We have a few questions to get to today. We'll start with one from Michael Zeta, who says, is Germany going to get relegated? And yes, they probably are. Right? And it's an unfortunate game for them. We talk quite a bit about the games that matter. With one more loss, they'll likely end up being knocked out at this tournament. But you look at it for Germany, this has been a bit of a disappointing tournament for them. Assuming the US ends up taking care of business against the German team, that will likely end up knocking them out of this tournament. And so for this German team, yes, it's been a disappointing tournament. We're 2 games in, and so that's the other factor. But you look across the way, and as far as the relegated team goes, you're going to get a chance against the team in Group A as well. So as much as, yes, you look to be relegated right now as far as going to the relegation spot, you still do have an opportunity to try and earn your way back in. The team you're going to be playing is likely Norway, could be Latvia at this point in the tournament. It's probably going to be one of those two teams, barring any kind of crazy upset towards the end. But very likely, especially of what we've kind of seen on paper and expectations go, likely going to be between Latvia and Norway as those two teams. Expect Norway to be that team in the relegation game. And then as far as how Germany and Norway stack up against each other, I do still give the edge to Norway. We talked about that in their team preview video as well as Germany's, because it is going to be a very tough game for them to try and find their way through in. That game today between Germany and Denmark had huge implications, and so a huge loss today for the Germans kind of put themselves into this tough situation now where it's basically going to end up being a do-or-die game to go home against a Norwegian team who always seems to find the win when it matters most at these tournaments. A tough end really to this tournament probably is going to end up being for the German team, but there's obviously the beautiful part. Still a lot of hockey to be played. We'll see whether or not this German squad can kind of find their way back at this tournament. Lots of hockey to play, especially as we go down the line. We'll see if they can pull off 2 big upsets and maybe a miracle as well on its way at this tournament for these teams, for this team. And so once again, don't want to give too much guess yet, but as this tournament continues to go on, we'll have a little bit better of a sense as to which team they will likely end up playing in that relegation game. Then we'll go to one from Nick, the double IHF fan, who says, for Denmark, Germany, amazing job by Denmark to collect their first preliminary round win at the U18 Men's World Championship since 2004. They had lost 22 straight. Then Canada and Latvia, that was better. I still want to see more efficient play from this Canadian team, but that was better. For Sweden, Czechia, the scoreboard says 2-1, but I have to imagine the Swedes have some concerns after that game, especially from the first two periods where they definitely didn't look their best. As for Czechia, what an amazing start to the tournament, taking 5 out of 6 points versus Sweden and the US. Sweden and the US on Saturday was always going to be an important game, but now it might be for a very different reason. And that's exactly right. And I think the other thing you have to look at now, and especially for both Sweden and the US, is which spot do you really want to end up in? And it's a funny experiment, because you think about the standings right now, especially with this Canadian team who lost their first game of the tournament. They're going to have to go play Finland. If they can beat Finland, there's still a potential. If Finland ends up beating Slovakia, there's still a potential for a three-way tie at the top half of this group, where we could see Canada still regain that top spot. But if they don't, and let's say there's an issue there getting points against the Finns, or if Slovakia goes out and beats the Finns, which is still a possibility at this point, all of a sudden, we're going to see Canada in that likely second spot, if not third spot in the standings. Then you're going to have to start to play, well, would you rather get the second spot in Group B or the third spot in Group B? Who would you rather play? Is it the Finns? Is it Canada? Is it the Slovaks? And you're going to end up playing a little bit of that matchmaker, which always is fun going into this tournament. And so for Sweden, for the US, as much as, yes, this game against where they're going to play each other is going to be a huge game to decide who ends up likely getting that second and third spot in the group, it's becoming ever so much more about, would you rather take this game and win, or would you rather kind of tank the win and get an easier opponent going in to that next round? It'll be fascinating to see which kind of, obviously as the tournament trends onwards, we'll see, have a better sense of where each team will end up in the standings. But as you said, it's going to be a very interesting one there to see whether or not the Swedes and the US is going to be a really important game to see about seeding more than anything else, and if there's any kind of bigger standings implications at stake there. We will then go to the last comment from the day from Tomasz Kodelka 5632, who says, since Czechia are now most likely first in their group, how much is them being in the final realistic? Also, could Slovakia compete for more than a semi-final if they remain their form against Canada? And I think, to answer both your questions, they are definitely tracking really well. And you look at for the Czechs, right? They're a team at this tournament who, coming in, expected to be that third spot team, but still very competitive. We had them going to the fourth place spot at the end of the turn. We had them kind of pulling off the so-called upset, if you will, against the Finns in that quarterfinal. But they were always right around teams like the Swedes, teams like the US. It was just a matter if they were going to be able to get that kind of extra step at this tournament. And what we've seen so far from them, part of the beautiful part about covering the day recap, so you can get to change your predictions a little bit, is the fact that they have seen those kind of big moments and those big opportunities get capitalized on, which in years past we might not have seen. And so for a Czech team that has struggled in the past at these tournaments, essentially locking up the top spot now with Sweden and the US, the two teams who should be rivaling that spot, having already lost to the Czechs, we'll see whether or not this Czech team is now, being in that perfect position where they want to be, going to be able to make their way back and make their way into that semifinals. From there, it's a little bit harder to predict, because once again, there's a lot of moving pieces, where if you look across the way, the Slovaks being in that top spot in Group A as of right now, whether or not they can keep that going. Obviously, the Finns are going to have something to say about that tomorrow, where they'll likely join them for that top spot. If the Finns or if the Slovaks end up in that top spot in Group A, the Czechs end up the top spot in Group B, you're likely going to end up seeing a bit more of that kind of interesting dynamic, where all of a sudden for the semifinals, which are more of the important aspect of the tournament, because if you're the one seeds, you're going to get to play an easier opponent. For the Slovaks, if they take Group A, they'll play now likely Denmark, which should be a game they can, I don't want to say easily win, but definitely have a better time than having to play a team like Czechia or teams like the US or Sweden. And so for Group B, on the other side, you're probably going to play Latvia, which I'd say you'd much rather play, or Norway as well. You could throw into that mix depending on who gets that relegation spot and who comes in fourth. for the Czechs, that's where you need to be if you want to go far. But then the semifinals is where those matchups get more important, because it's about not only how do you rank in your own group, but how do you rank in the group across, and also who's underneath you, because the third spot over in Group B, whether it's the US or the Swedes, is going to get to play the second spot in Group A. And so if that's Canada versus the US or Canada versus Sweden in that quarterfinal, you want to likely be either the winner, the top spot, or the loser, the second spot, going into those semifinals, because obviously the two top spots are going to kind of get their way. It wouldn't surprise me, I think, if you're asking me if one of the teams we'll see in the final, I think there's a very good likelihood of that, especially when you take into consideration that the other semifinal or the other quarterfinal will likely be Finland or Slovakia at this point, going up against US or Sweden as well. And so that's what's going to be very fascinating to see, especially for both these teams, because I do think that if you're asking me about both, if I can take either Finland or I can take either Slovakia or Czechia, I would say one of those two teams as of this point, if they can keep it going. A big if here is if the Slovaks can beat the Finns. If Slovakia goes on to beat Finland, locks up the top spot in Group A. If the Czechs continue their success, lock up the top spot in Group B, one of those two teams should find themselves in, of course, to the eventual semifinals, because depending on how those groups shake out to be, whether it's the Finns, whether it's the US, whether it's Sweden, whether it's Canada, all of those teams are going to be teams that could very well you could see either team winning in those games. And so in those kind of 50-50 games, especially when the playoffs roll around, I'll always emphasize that playoff hockey in these tournaments is very different than kind of regular preliminary round action at these tournaments. And so that's where you're going to see the biggest difference, is these teams are going to come a little bit more to play. And so we'll see whether or not for some of the quote unquote stronger teams who haven't jumped in as of this point in the tournament, we're going to see a different game from them. But also, sticks get held a little bit tighter in the playoffs. Teams like the Czechs, teams like the Slovaks are able to hang around for longer. You throw in the fact that Slovakia is on home ice, a huge opportunity for them here in this tournament. But once again, come back tomorrow. 2 big games on the slate, 2 relatively blowout games, but more importantly, we'll preview the day ahead as we will wrap all of it up and more. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you're really serious subscribing, tell all your friends and comment down below your thoughts on day 2 of the Men's Under 18 World Championship. Until next time, see you.